Let's take a quick look at the setup we will use. We have a web server deployed on a public cloud, in this case AWS, and exposed to the internet through F5 distributed cloud platform. So the client connections will be going through an F5 distributed cloud load balancer, then through an F5 distributed cloud AWS VPC site, and then to the web server. Any outbound connections originating from the web server will have to go through the same distributed cloud AWS site.
Welcome to F5CE deployment on AWS, which is ridiculously easy to follow. First, let's take a look at the steps on getting F5CE programmatic deployment, the Terraform parameter preparation on F5XC portal, which to be deployed on AWS environment. We are configuring AWS region and required VPC parameters. F5CE network settings were configured as part of AWS deployment settings. For programmatic deployment, an AWS cloud credential is mandatory and configured as part of the settings. F5CE shell access, deployment location settings, are configured as part of the process. F5CE disk size and service accessibility to be configured as well. Now, let's review the settings once more before saving it. We are ready to start the deployment process and take a look at the programmatic deployment steps. Let's start the deployment process by kickstart the Terraform plan action. Make sure the AWS environment is ready and capture the instance count before deployment. After plan, we will initiate the Terraform apply action, which is a result. Kickstart the programmatic F5CE deployment on AWS environment. Yeah, the Terraform applied were successful. Next, and finally, let's examine the deployment statuses both on F5XC portal and AWS Management Console to make sure the deployment is properly executed. Hooray! F5CE is up and running, and the deployment was successful. Let's have a walkthrough on F5 Distributed Cloud Portal, on how the API security settings look like. First, we will review the application virtual load balancer configuration on F5CE. The root option is to configure the backend pool or application origin, which is pointing to the application, which is hosted in AWS environment. Worth to mention that it is ridiculously easy to turn on bot defense configuration on F5CE. Same for the API security configuration, it can be activated with a simple click. On Security Dashboard, scroll down and click on one of the API Gateway Virtual Load Balancer to view the API threats landscape. You may define duration for API statistics view, based on time value. At one glance, you are able to have a holistic view on API security landscape, on selected API Gateway Virtual Load Balancer. Click on API's endpoint, to view API inventory, discovery, and shadow APIs. Shadow APIs are highlighted in red, with option to zoom into individual endpoint for more insight and control. In endpoint details, you may configure protection rule and rate limit to secure selected API endpoint. For control, you may configure HTTP query parameters, HTTP headers, and cookie matchers in protection rule settings. At the same time, you may define API rate limit value for the selected API endpoint as well. By and large, you have full visibility on performance data for the selected API endpoint. Other than graphical view, you may view shadow APIs by table format. Personal Identifiable Information, or PII, is presented in sensitive data field, such as credit card number. You may extract API definition file in OpenAPI format by download the Swagger file. Afterwards, you may update the downloaded Swagger file and re-upload as a new API definition or inventory version. Alternatively, you may download the API Swagger file or statistic of respective API categories in JSON format by performing an API call by using developer tool or automation. To upload a new version of API definition file, simply modify existing API Gateway Virtual Load Balancer settings, and re-upload a new version of the Swagger file. Thank you for watching F5 CE API Security Protection on AWS environment.